Victoria set a new state record for the hottest recorded day, 48.9 degrees, 0.1 degree above the previous record, which was set 17 years ago. But that's still nearly 3 degrees cooler than Australia's highest ever recorded temperature, 50.7 degrees set in Oodnadatta in 1960. 1960, which is 65 years ago. 65 years of the global warming that's now supposedly blamed for this heat. Meanwhile, the US is facing a bitter cold snap, and the world's overall temperature has tumbled again in the past, well, nearly 2 years now. It's still higher than the long-term average, but by less than 1/3 of 1 degree. Now, in a heat wave like this, everyone will be rushing to turn on their aircon, if they've got it, when they get home from work especially, but that's now going to cost you a mozza because our government's decided to try to stop global warming by going net zero, using more green power, and of course going green costs much more. And the problem is, particularly right about this time of day, when the wind or the sun tends to disappear, good heavens. In Victoria, in fact, the spot price of power as we went to air rocketed nearly 40 times what it was earlier today, when there was a lot more sun. So thank heavens that we've still got fossil fuels, which was providing more than half the state's power about right now and nearly 2/3 of Australia's. So we still need to be very grateful for coal and gas, especially when we read there's now been a huge slump in investment over the past year in the large-scale wind and solar projects that the Albanese government had been counting on to replace these fossil fuels. Joining me is Aidan Morrison, trained physicist and Director of Energy at the Centre for Independent Studies. Aidan Morrison, thank you so much for joining us. Aidan, is this heat wave global warming?
Look, we actually just can't say that with any confidence at all. It's one of the very foolish things that is done remarkably often these days, is to take a very, very complex system with lots of variance and variety and interactions between many different places, many different times, and start to pick just the outliers at certain places and times to draw evidence of a global trend. That's not sensible, but it happens all the time. So you have to weigh it in the context of all the other variation we have. It's actually been a relatively cool Christmas week. I'm sure you remember. I was quite surprised at how cold it was. I wasn't in the water very much at all. I've also spoken to, example, farmers in Victoria who've said the last 3 summers have been much, much cooler than average, and they find that and experience that in the way they farm. So the whole system, and not just around Victoria, not around South Australia, and not even just Australia at all, has to be considered before drawing any conclusion, and know these outliers aren't evidence necessarily of any particular long-running global trend.
Now, how is our power system, which of course is being revolutionised to cut emissions to allegedly stop global warming, how's our power system coping with this?
It's certainly showing some signs of strain at the moment. For example, just last night in South Australia, they had a very extreme price event. The grid was very constrained, trying to meet near record demands. The sun, of course, had set and it was still hot. The wind was very low, and South Australia has huge amounts of solar installed and wind installed, and that didn't really help them. The batteries played a small part, maybe about a quarter of the part that gas was playing to keep the air conditioners on, and then it tapped out. The batteries were all done and dusted with about half an hour, about 6 increments of extreme high price, $20,000 a megawatt hour price events happened after the batteries would completely shut up and empty their capacity. So we are a very long way from having wind and solar see us through those sorts of things. And also there's deep questions about interconnection and whether the interconnectors and the supposed solution of having a greater and stronger links to other states will work. At least one of the interconnectors to Victoria was not operating through the peak demand last night in South Australia. So signs of strain are definitely present, and we'll see that in prices when that volatility is factored into the wholesale costs in the future.
I know during the day the solar is sure doing its work. It's really when the sun goes down and the heat still stays around, as it is doing. It's been a real heat dome, and Adelaide had a record hot night. Now, this slump in investment last year in big wind and solar projects, why did that happen and what does it mean?
Look, it's just the financial evidence of something that is really an underlying physical and engineering reality and economic reality. So this is just what has been long predicted is coming to pass. And what it really means is that when you've got a very windy day or a very sunny day, the prices are depressed, which means the value for that power that's generated by the wind and the sun actually falls. And so the market is now telling us that we've got too much of that. Nobody wants to commit to paying a fixed high price for 15, 20, 25 years for energy that turns up at free or negative prices in the spot market. And so that's why financiers are not backing more wind and solar into the system, because it's got to the point where the market prices are telling the system that we've got enough of that. And so they're following the underlying dynamics faithfully, as they should. And now we have the government reaching over the top to try to incentivise and subsidise more renewable generation. And that doesn't seem to be working as well. Even with big subsidies being offered to lots of companies, they're still not moving on their investments, perhaps because of the risk there isn't the transmission in place, which is a huge additional cost that is not proceeding at pace or according to price expectations.
And when you say subsidies, of course, those are going to be paid through our taxes. That's a hidden cost to us, on top of the power bills, which, Aidan, we're told will rise over the next year by 24%. Now, why is that?
Look, there's a couple of things going on there, and one is that the government has been masking the increases in power prices with subsidies. Basically, it's a rebate. The Commonwealth government in particular has done that in the run-up to the last election to try to keep power prices from escalating as fast as they otherwise would have. They've decided prudently to take that rebate away, and so we're going to have a big bump from that during this part of the year. In addition, many of the costs to support renewable energy are just starting to hit the system seriously, such as increasing costs from transmission projects being rolled out, including the New South Wales renewable energy zones, such as Central West Orana, things like HumeLink as well, and Project Energy Connect, which has blown out in cost massively. So as some of these costs start to come onto the system, we will see them added to your bills, and they're the ones we can't wriggle out of, and they will push up prices overall. So I think that the inevitable is happening. The honeymoon, where a little bit of renewable energy is easy to accommodate, has finished now, and the expensive part of trying to jam more renewable energy into the system when it's already reached the point where it's too much at certain times and places, the expensive part is starting just now.
Aidan, put it all together. Look, so in a heat wave, we are having to pay very high prices for electricity when the sun goes down and the heat still stays around. We've got a massive slump in investment in the big projects we need for green power, if you think we need green power. We've got a shortage of electricity in the winter months when, of course, there isn't that sun to keep us, the power system going. And we've got these massive price rises. Put it all together, what picture is that painting?
Look, the picture is of a poorly planned energy system. If you want to have an energy system that delivers low prices in the long term, you have to have an efficient and effective energy system. And one of those is basically, in simple engineering terms, you need a little bit of machinery that delivers a lot. You need machines that operate in steady state. Steady state is an engineer's friend, and it turns out to be an economist and a financier's friend as well. What we're doing by driving more and more weather-driven generation to the system is creating a system that does the opposite. It goes from huge highs and lows. The energy comes in rushes and gushes, and you have to build more and more supporting infrastructure that is utilised not very often. We're building lots and lots of machines that deliver very little, and that is a recipe for an expensive system. And you can see it under strain on the high heat days when you don't have the energy generation that matches up well with that demand. And so the cost of all the other systems, such as the batteries to move energy around the clock to when it's needed, and the transmission, as well as the system security things like synchronous condensers, they're starting to all add up. All of these machines that are required to produce little or no electricity on average to try to get electricity out of a weather-dependent system. That's what's happening to us.
In very simplistic terms, you have to build two systems instead of one to take over for when the weather-dependent ones conk out. Aidan Morrison, thank you so much indeed for your time.